Were you all ever doing these in person, and if so, where?
We,
Good afternoon. My name is Arlen Lewis, and I'm a partner in the Birmingham, Alabama office of Blueprint Construction Council. I'm the chair of the ABA Forum on Construction Law, and on behalf of the forum, I'd like to welcome you to another installment of the forum's monthly Diversity and Inclusion Brunch series featuring Angela Vallot, a partner with VallotKarp Consulting. The ABA Forum on Construction Law is the largest organization of construction lawyers in the world and serves as a thought leader and resource to the construction industry. Diversity and inclusion is a priority of the forum, and we consistently take action to enhance participation, inclusion, and leadership opportunities for attorneys of diverse backgrounds in forum programs, publications, and other initiatives. The forum offers several scholarships, fellowships, and leadership development programs to enhance diversity among construction lawyers. If you are not yet a member of the forum or an affiliate, I invite you to join our organization and participate more fully in our ongoing programs to support the construction industry. And you can do so by finding us at americanbar.org and searching for construction law. On a broader scale, the forum is committed to raising awareness and understanding of the vital role diversity plays in the construction industry. For many years, the forum has featured a broad spectrum of prominent keynote diversity speakers at each of its national meetings, ranging from civil rights lawyer Fred Gray, the Right Honorable Beverly McLaughlin, the first woman to serve as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, and Vicki O'Leary, ironworker and 2019 ENR Award of Excellence winner for her efforts to combat harassment on construction project sites. Recently, the forum held a first ever national meeting dedicated exclusively to inclusion, diversity, and professionalism within the construction industry. At the core of the forum are the principles of respect, professionalism, inclusion, and collegiality. In addition to race, gender, ethnicity, and other categories traditionally associated with diversity and inclusion, we also value the diversity of ideas, perspectives, and opinions. Accordingly, through the Diversity and Inclusion Brunch series, we feature a 1-hour conversation with keynote speakers who provide insight into issues of diversity, inclusion, construction, and the legal industry. These programs are free and open to all members of the forum, friends, clients, and anyone else who's interested. Pre-registration is required, so mark your calendars and stay tuned for announcements containing registration details. We'd like to thank Nick Holmes, chair of the forum's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, for his support in the development of the series. We also want to thank Tamara Harrington, LaShonda Williams, Colleen Hardison, and all of our forum staff for helping to make this program a reality. Now with that, let's get into our session. And I'm pleased to introduce the person principally responsible for organizing today's session, our moderator, Kelly Bundy of Hirschler. Kelly, it's all yours.
Thank you, Arlen. Thanks everybody for being here today. As Arlen mentioned, our speaker today is Angela Vallot. Angela Vallot is a renowned diversity and inclusion consultant with VallotKarp. Prior to forming VallotKarp with her business partner, Mitchell, Angela worked as a lawyer for over 17 years at two very large law firms. She was then recruited to be Texaco's first chief diversity officer and also spent some time as the global chief diversity officer for Colgate-Palmolive. Angela, thank you so much for being here today.
Kelly, thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted and honored to be in conversation with you today. And kudos to the Construction Law Forum for doing these on a monthly basis and for making diversity and inclusion a strategic priority. So delighted to be here.
Angela, tell us a little bit about your career as a lawyer and how you experienced diversity and inclusion in the legal profession.
Okay, great way to start, Kelly. I actually started my career as a real estate lawyer, which was one of the reasons that I was excited about doing this conversation today with the Construction Law Forum. I spent 10 years representing commercial real estate developers in Washington, D.C., and I donned many a hard hat walking into construction sites and learning how to read blueprints. Working with commercial developers to get the approvals they needed. So my specialization was land use and zoning law. It's interesting. So I started practicing law in 1980, a long time ago, and diversity was not really on the radar screen for law firms at that time. In fact, I was the first African-American in my law firm and one of the few women. It was a lonely time, practicing law in those days. And interestingly, without sort of knowing it at the time, I was sort of the business case, if you will, for diversity. I was lucky because at a very early stage in my career, I had a successful law practice. Why? Because commercial real estate developers knew that if they were trying to get business done in the District of Columbia, which was overwhelmingly Black, that they needed to have, some Black representation. So I was the only Black real estate lawyer doing land use and zoning law at the time. So my dance card was pretty filled, I was able to navigate my way through the system in DC, getting commercial developers the approvals that they needed to construct these large office buildings, to negotiate with communities, and sometimes with the architect of the Capitol. So that sort of was an early representation before diversity was really a thing, but that's how my law career started. And then later I became a government relations lawyer, but I spent 10 years in the real estate industry.
And how did you make the transition from the legal industry to D&I consulting?
So that was sort of an interesting story, and like so many things in life, unplanned, but I was sort of in the right place at the right time. In 1996, Texaco, which at that time was the third largest corporation in America, settled a huge racial discrimination lawsuit. It was a class action lawsuit that was brought by African Americans in the company, alleging discrimination on the basis of disparity in pay and promotions. Texaco was forced to settle that lawsuit when a secret tape recording was leaked to the New York Times, and it featured two white male managers at Texaco using the N-word when talking about African American employees and talking about Blacks as being like black jelly bean stuck at the bottom of the jelly bean jar. It was quite a salacious story that made the front page of the New York Times and headline news all over the world, again, because Texaco was the third largest corporation in the world. Anyway, they settled that lawsuit for $176 million. It was at the time the largest ever settlement of a racial discrimination lawsuit. I had the opportunity to meet the CEO of Texaco at a conference, and I was trying to get him as a client for my law firm. And ironically, after a few conversations, he said, "Why don't you come to work for us?" And my initial reaction was, "I don't think so," because at that time, Texaco had such a negative reputation for, and was seen as being a very racist company. Anyway, long story short, I did agree to go to work for Texaco, and I became the first chief diversity officer. And that was at a time when, corporations really didn't have people in these roles overseeing diversity. And it was an exciting opportunity, and it really spawned a whole new career for me. I had always been interested in diversity as an African-American woman, and I had been actively involved in my law firm's, diversity committee. But, I never knew that you could do this as a career. So I was at Texaco for about 7 years, and I established the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, worked closely with the board of directors and with the court-appointed task force, and really did a lot of work to, enhance Texaco's image and reputation. And it took some time, but we were very proud of the progress we made. And then unfortunately, we got acquired by Chevron, and that was part of the merger. And that's when I then got recruited by Colgate-Palmolive to be their global chief diversity officer. And it was at that point that I was really, passionate about doing this work and knew that I was going to continue it as a full-time career.
When you think back to your career as a lawyer and your experience today as a diversity and inclusion consultant, how much progress do you think we've made, where we were then versus where we are now?
Well, the sad reality, Kelly, is that we haven't made a whole lot of progress. We've made some progress, but not nearly the rate of progress that we should have. Sadly, the legal profession, as many of you know, is one of the least diverse professions of any profession. So, we've been sort of moving at a glacial pace. I'll share some statistics that sort of make this point. Women have been more than 50% of law school classes for, I think about 20 years, and yet women are only 21% of equity partners. Racial and ethnic minorities are 33% of law school graduates, but are only about 9%, represent only 9% of equity partners. And then if you look at African American equity partners, less than 2%. In terms of LGBTQ, 6% of law school graduates, less than 2% equity partners. So we have work to do. The numbers are moving very, very slowly. And the predictions are, in order for the legal profession to reach parity with the percentage of law school grads, it would take another 38 years for women to be 50% of equity partnerships and to, equal their representation in terms of at the law school graduation rates. And it would take 65 years for people of color to achieve 33% representation. And then it gets really, really depressing if you look at, Black attorneys. And of course, there's so much focus today on, racial equity, particularly as it relates to African Americans. There's some predictions that it would take, 200 years for African Americans to achieve parity. So it's not a very bright picture, and we have a lot of work to do.
Can you speak a little bit to the relevancy and urgency of D&I efforts today, particularly in light of this long overdue cultural reckoning that our country is grappling with?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this work for about 25 years now, and it's been a rough year, a really, really rough year, in terms of, all of the police killings, the ensuing protests, what happened on Capitol Hill on January 6th in terms of, the attempt to overthrow our democracy, by white supremacists. So one of the silver linings in this difficult time for me is I am seeing law firms, corporations, and other organizations, looking at this issue in a more authentic way than I've ever witnessed before. And I think it really is a racial reckoning. And I think for the first time, we're having some very candid conversations about the fact that we don't have a level playing field. And I think that people for many years have labored under the illusion that we had a level playing field. And I think especially in the legal industry, there's so much attention focused on meritocracy, meritocracy, meritocracy. But I think the sad reality is that we are not the meritocracy we had thought we were, and we have work to do because we don't have a level playing field. And we know that people of color are not getting access to the same opportunities, or not being promoted, as they should be. So I think, the moment we're in has really put a spotlight on the need to focus on racial inequality. And so far, the jury's out, but I am hopeful, and I'm seeing signs that organizations are making this a strategic priority and focusing on it in a way that I've never quite seen before.
You mentioned a moment ago being an example of the business case. Can you speak a little bit to that? What is the business case, and how do you get buy-in from leadership to focus on D&I?
Yeah, so the business case is different for different organizations, but what we try to do in my firm is help organizations to figure out what we call the why care. I think it's, to so many people, it's obvious, and you shouldn't have to come up with a business case, because I like to start with, it's the right thing to do. And I think this moment of racial reckoning that we're having has really helped people to understand and focus on, the history of this country, which many people don't fully understand and don't know, and didn't learn it in school, but to really understand how deeply embedded systemic racism is in our culture, that it really is deeply embedded in all of our, institutions, practices, and policies. We like to start with, it's the right thing to do, but I think it has to be a blended approach, and it also has to make sense in terms of business. So, one of the things that has really gotten the attention of law firms is corporate clients. And thankfully, client demand is one of the big reasons to focus on this. And so many corporations have really led the effort in getting law firms to focus, on diversity and inclusion over the last, 10 to 20 years. We haven't made the progress we need, but it's in large measure thanks to the corporate community, because they have said, many of the corporate clients have said, we are making it one of the selection criterion. And in fact, we're seeing the heat being turned up by a number of corporations. Coca-Cola just recently, in the last 2 weeks, announced that they are frustrated and tired of the lack of progress in law firms. And Coca-Cola is now requiring that their outside counsel staff their matters with 30% people of color, and half of that 30% should be Black attorneys. And they are also saying that they will withhold 30% of payment if their outside providers don't meet those requirements. So that's a sea change, and Coke is inviting other corporations to join them in sort of turning up the heat. And of course, Coke's not the only company to do this. Over the years, we've seen other companies that have had some pretty aggressive, tactics. Facebook also has a 30% representation requirement. HP has Hewlett Packard had a 2% bonus for law firms that met the requirements. I think some other companies are withholding 10%. So I think we can expect to see a lot more of it. So I would say that would be the second reason, not in this particular order, but client demand. That if you want to continue to do business with these corporations, you're going to have to show that you're more serious taking diversity diversity and inclusion more seriously. And then in terms of other reasons, Kelly, I would say that, the evidence is pretty clear. There's so much research that shows that diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams. They come up with more innovative thinking, cutting edge legal solutions. They avoid groupthink. In terms of image and reputation, another reason, it is a lot harder to recruit diverse talent when you don't already have diverse talent. Studies show that people of color, but not only people of color, white associates want to work in diverse environments that represent or reflect the communities in which they live and work. We know that diversity and inclusion help to promote productivity and engagement and a sense of belonging. And, people don't stay in organizations where they don't feel comfortable and they don't feel like they fit in. And it also helps with retention. And sadly, statistics show that women and people of color leave law firms at higher rates. Women leave have at an 11% higher rate than men, and people of color leave at a 33% higher rate than white associates. So, if you want to retain people, it's not enough to, you really do have to look at culture. What kind of environment are you creating? Because it's not enough to just recruit people. You're going to have a revolving door if you don't have a culture where people feel a sense of belonging, where people are getting access to work that helps them to grow and develop, whether, people who are going to help mentor them. So it's got to be a combination of both recruiting and retention and retaining people.
So for a firm that, say, understands the business case and understands we really need to start focusing on creating a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace, but we don't know where to start. We don't even have a baseline of where we are right now. What is generally your recommendation as the next step for a firm like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kelly. There's no right or wrong place in terms of where to start, but we generally like to start with some sort of culture assessment, sort of gathering up, looking at what you currently have. So, we like to look at demographics. What are your current demographics? What are your retention rates like? What are your attrition rates? Are people leaving the firm, and and looking at how many women are leaving the firm, how many people of color are leaving the firm, and is that different from your white population? So some of it is just gathering quantitative information in terms of demographics, and also looking at the leadership of the firm, looking at your executive committee, looking at your practice group heads. What are those demographics look like? What percentage are men? What percentage are women? What percentage are women of color? So some of that you can do yourselves. You can do that internally. We often get hired to help firms conduct culture assessments, and some part of it is the quantitative data, but the other part is the qualitative data, really looking at how different people are experiencing the firm. And we typically do this in a number of ways. Sometimes we'll conduct an online survey with a number of questions to get at, how are people getting access to opportunity? Do people feel like they're a part of the firm? And then we have people do that on SurveyMonkey, and we analyze the data to see, are women experiencing the firm in a different way than men are? Are people of color having a different experience than whites? Are people of different backgrounds, LGBT associates? So that's one way to do it, is an online survey. Another way is to conduct focus groups. We often will conduct focus groups of, women, people of color. Sometimes we bring together LGBTQ associates, again, to ask them questions about their experience at the firm. And often we'll also do a combination of some one-on-one interviews with the leadership, with partners of the firm, to get their assessment. So once we put all of this together, generally there's a story, and we present that back to the firm in terms of, what are the strengths, what's working well for the firm, and what are some challenges, and opportunities for improvement in terms of diversity. So I think that's a good starting place is to kind of look at what you have. Where are you now? And that can often lead to putting together, an action plan or a strategic plan.
Do you find that when you folks are conducting cultural assessments and focus groups, that the level of anonymity that you folks can provide to employees encourages employees to be more candid in their responses?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It does. So, obviously when people are in a firm or in a job, you're going to be really careful about what you say. So often we're able to get information from people that they wouldn't, comfortably share with leaders or people in the firm. So for instance, when we conduct our online survey, it's done through SurveyMonkey, so it's not on the firm's server, and it's completely, anonymous. We ask people to self-identify in terms of race and gender, and we're able to collate the results without attribution. When we do one-on-one interviews or focus groups, our commitment is that, again, we are looking to report themes, but we will not, attribute comments to any particular individuals. So I think it does help to promote, candor, to get people to, and people will always generally talk more candidly to outside consultants than they will to people in-house.
You mentioned incorporating the findings of the cultural assessment into an action plan. Can you explain, what you mean by that and what the components of a good action plan are following a cultural assessment?
Yeah, so what we like to say is that an action plan or a strategic plan, it's like a roadmap. It's a blueprint to help you figure out next steps. So often, organizations try to do diversity and inclusion on a piecemeal basis. They'll throw a training at it, put together a diversity council, try a little of this, try a little of that, but it's really not done in a methodic, sort of disciplined way. And not surprisingly, organizations get frustrated and sort of throw up their hands and say, we've tried everything and nothing is working. And often what I say is, well, you have a strategic plan for your business, right? Most businesses wouldn't operate without some sort of strategic plan. So we should treat diversity and inclusion the same way. It should be done, in a business-like way with a plan. And we know that we didn't get here overnight in terms of creating these results, so we're not going to change it overnight. So one of the nice things about a strategic plan is it helps you look at, and this is one of the things we help organizations do, is look at where are you now, and we can pull from the results of the culture assessment if we've done that. Where would you like to be 3 to 5 years from now? So this is where you get to sort of, wave a magic wand, so to speak. What would you like to see your firm achieve in terms of diversity and inclusion? So we look at where you are currently, where you'd like to be, and then we talk about what needs to happen in order to close that gap. And that becomes the basis for identifying sort of focus areas. What do we want to focus on? And for most firms, it's generally how do we recruit more people of color, and that may include recruiting at different schools, looking at how we conduct interviews. So we identify the focus area and then help come up with action steps, actual tangible things that you can do to help, increase recruitment. And then often another focus area for firms will be retention. What do we need to do to enhance retention and to focus on development so that, we keep people, so that people don't leave the firm, that we're able to get our attrition numbers down, and we help come up with actual action steps. And then part of developing a plan is also looking at metrics. How are we going to measure success? So we help to incorporate into the plan, what are the success metrics? Who's responsible for achieving that goal? How do we measure it? And also, the other piece I'll say is to help prioritize. So, we're not going to be able to boil the ocean. So let's look at what can we achieve in year one? What's some low-hanging fruit? What are some things that we can do immediately to help, address some of the issues and focus areas? What's a year 2 priority and what's a year 3? So we typically like to do 3-year action plans or strategic plans so that you have a little roadmap to say, okay, year 1, we're going to do this. In year 2, we're going to do this. In year 3, we're going to do this, because, it's a process and it's not going to happen overnight.
Do you see many firms try to focus on the recruitment piece to the exclusion of retention? And where do you find that firms often sort of go off track when it comes to focusing on those two pieces?
That is such a good question. I think historically, firms have been focused too much on recruitment. And of course, look, there's never, any shortage of work to do there. There is a tremendous need to recruit more diversity. But the other piece of it, which in some ways is even harder to do, is to focus on the culture and a culture of inclusion. Because, if you recruit people, but you bring people into the firm, but you don't have a culture that allows people to make their best contribution, to feel a sense of belonging, to get access to good work, then it's not going to work, right? People are going to leave. And one of the biggest challenges in law firms is we know it's all about the work. It's, the assignments are the lifeblood of, law firms. And the way we become good lawyers is we need to get access to good work. We need people to mentor us and to help us learn how to become good lawyers. And so often, what we hear over and over and over again is somehow people of color, particularly African Americans, come into firms, but somehow they're not getting access to good work. And part of the way we know this, Kelly, is in many of our firm clients, we've tracked utilization rates. And sadly, what we often find, not so much to our surprise, but to the surprise of the firm for whom we're doing it, is that utilization rates are lower often for people of color, again, particularly for African Americans, but often we find utilization rates lower also for women, for white women. So there's a way in which, I don't think this stuff happens consciously. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, oh, I'm going to give less work to women, or I'm going to not fully engage, people of color. I think it happens because, relationships form pretty quickly. I think reputations form pretty quickly. And there isn't enough time and attention spent helping to onboard people, assign mentors and make sure that people are being fully utilized.
What metrics do you think firms themselves could track to keep an eye on utilization when you mention utilization rates?
Yeah, so I think part of this means just doing the work, and some firms have already built it into their, their different programs to help track hours billed. And it's really not just hours. It really, the next level, I would say, 101 is just tracking hours, because there is a story there and it'll tell you who's busy and who's not busy. And, are you finding that there's any disproportionality in terms of women or people of color being, less busy or less utilized. But then you also have to look at the type of work they're doing. So it's not enough to just be busy, because, in litigation, somebody could be busy with document review. And we have found that, that is one of the ways that, unconscious bias can show up, that we often find that, women and people of color are doing, a disproportionate share of what we call busy work or housework, whether it's document review or putting together binders or, scheduling client meetings, or so it's what's become known as, the housework or the administrative work. And, we know that that work doesn't help you to grow and develop. Everybody's got to do a certain amount of it, right? Regardless of your practice area. But what we find over and over again is, on the corporate side, when it comes to deals and closings, we find that women are putting together, the doing the majority of the closing work, the signature pages and the timelines and all important stuff, but they're not getting access to what's now called the glamour work, or the work that helps you to grow and develop. So I think that the second stage of tracking utilization is looking at what kind of work is being done. And this is where we've been able to sort of hold up the mirror once we gather and collect that data and help firms to come up with some strategies on how to address that. In one of our firm clients, they developed a policy of rotating some of this so-called administrative work. sometimes it historically has gone to the newest person or the most junior person on the team. But what we find happens over and over again is often women will do such a good job at it, know how to multitask and get it done well, that, you know, partners and senior counsel will just say, well, they do it so well, and when the guys do it, you know, it's a disaster, so we just have the women continue to do it. Well, that's, you know, patently unfair, and it ends up, you know, hurting, you know, the potential for women to get some of this, you know, work, that more challenging work. So that's one way to respond to this issue of utilization. But I think just start by tracking the numbers and looking to see what story do your numbers tell and where do you need to focus your attention.
You mentioned unconscious bias, and I think that that has become the new buzzword for a lot of firms and businesses that are focused on DE&I. What are your thoughts on unconscious bias training? Do you think that that works? And if so, what are the key components to make that training successful?
So we've been doing unconscious bias training for, I would say, probably the last 8 years or so. And we're still doing it, and it's important work. I would say that the ante has been sort of upped, if you will, and given the current moment we're in with the spotlight on, you know, racial inequality, we're also doing a lot of work on, you know, dismantling anti-racism. You know, it's kind of interesting because when we started doing bias work 8 years ago, you know, law firms are really afraid to even use the B word, like, oh, you know, if we talk about bias, is that going to subject us to liability, or is it going to mean we have bias? Well, what we know today from all of the research and the scientists who've been doing work in this area is basically what they tell us is if you have a brain, you have some bias. It's not about admitting or denying it, just stipulate to the fact that we all have bias. And it's really about looking at how it shows up. So, you know, in looking in the rearview mirror now, bias almost seems like, you know, a gentle topic compared to talking about anti-racism. But back to your question, you know, does bias training work, or does any training work? I think training, and actually we don't even like to call it training. I think most lawyers really resent the idea of being, you know, trained on diversity and inclusion. We call them conversations, discussions, workshops. They can be effective, and they are effective in terms of increasing awareness, helping to make these conversations a little easier to talk about, because look, let's face it, race has never been easy to talk about. And people talk about race, but generally not at work. We were all trained that you don't, that's a taboo topic, right? You don't talk about race at work. And if you are going to talk about it, you talk in your homogeneous communities, right? So, you know, people of color talk to other people of color about this, you know, whites talk to whites, you know, and when it comes to gender issues, women talk to women, but we don't talk across our difference. So I think that having these conversations and these workshops in the workplace helps to remove some of the stigma from the topic. And we say to people, it's to help you get comfortable talking about uncomfortable things, because unless we get comfortable, we're never going to sort of bridge that gap. But here's my big thing about, you know, workshops, training, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't work if you're doing that in isolation. So, you know, there have been any number of articles written on this topic, which are always so frustrating to us in the D&I business, because, you know, there are these articles slamming diversity training. It doesn't work. Well, of course it doesn't work if that's the only thing you're doing. And so many organizations want to just do a training. And we always ask people, what are you trying to achieve? And what's the objective? Is this a check the box? Because if it's a check the box, you're going to get just those results. But if, you know, workshops, D&I, education, awareness are done as part of a more comprehensive approach, then it can be successful. So for instance, if you've done a culture assessment, if you have an action plan, and this is one of the, action steps in your strategic plan to help to educate people, then it becomes part of a comprehensive approach, and it is effective. But just done, you know, as an independent solo thing, typically not, because, you know, people will learn some stuff, take some stuff away, but then everybody goes back to doing what they've always done. So firms have to make sure that it's not just a, oh, here's a training. There also has to be some accountability after that. And that's one of the ways in the firms where we've seen this be successful. It's because firms are doing it more comprehensively, and they're also looking at, okay, how are we going to hold people accountable to what we say is important? It's not enough to just say diversity and inclusion is important. Every firm says that, but what are you doing to really walk the talk? Are you holding people accountable to mentoring? Are you, tracking your retention rates? Are you tracking utilization rates? There's got to be some accountability there, or else it doesn't really matter whether you get it right or not.
How do you folks help firms take the step from identifying and understanding individualized unconscious bias to understanding the manner in which unconscious bias sort of weaves itself into the systems and institution of the firm itself, and take that extra step to interrupt bias at that higher level?
So part of this is understanding that, bias and, institutional racism and institutional, inequality are not so much about individual acts, but it's really about systemic institutional, policies, practices that are endemic and so deeply embedded, not only in law firms, but across, every institution, in our country. So part of this is really sort of getting into the weeds and helping people to understand how, endemic this stuff is, and helping firms understand how they can begin to implement some bias interrupters. So for instance, if you just look at assignments, it's really looking at and tracking and measuring not only utilization, but looking to partners and the people who distribute the work. Who are your go-to people? Everybody's got their go-to people. And what does the composition of your go-to pool look like? Are you engaging in what we call affinity bias? It's the people who look like you, or what we sometimes call the mini-me syndrome. So often what we hear in firms is, someone has taken on a mentee or, an apprentice, so to speak, and it's generally someone who reminds them of their younger self. That was me in my early career. So it may, it often and historically has been sort of male partners sponsoring and mentoring young white male associates. And unfortunately, there haven't been enough people of color to sort of take under wing other associates of color. So it becomes incumbent on, white partners to help mentor young associates of color. So sometimes it's looking at, again, how the assignments are spread out, who's getting the work and who's not, interrupting some of this, who's doing the administrative or the housework. If you think about evaluations, that's another area. Sometimes we will work with the evaluation committee and help a firm to look at, how are evaluations being done? And, might there be some hidden bias in the evaluation process? And what I mean by that is there are studies that have been done that show that there is often different language used in the written evaluations of men and women, and also people of color, different language, different adjectives. What we find is that often, the written evaluations of women contain a lot more focus on personality, demeanor, speaking style. We don't see that in the evaluations of men. Often their evaluations are much more focused on outcomes, measurable and deliverable results, strategic thinker. And actually it was Stanford University that recently did a study looking at evaluations and uncovering some of the hidden bias in the written evaluations of men and women. And if somebody is getting a written evaluation that says, they're a team player, collaborative, a pleasure to have on the team, which we often see in women's evaluations, versus strategic thinker, delivers outcomes, well, who do you think is going to be on track for partner? The person who's delivering, results and is a strategic thinker. So that's one area that we can sort of hone in and look at the evaluation process. Sometimes it's to look at how interviews are conducted and to work with recruitment committees. are people trained in, competency-based interviewing or behavioral-based interviewing? Often that's where bias will creep into the interview process. You sit down, you interview someone, maybe they went to your same school. Before you know it, you're talking about, oh, did you have this professor, or did you, do this, or were you a member of this club? And you're kind of off and running, right? Well, you've sort of strayed from the competencies and skill sets you're looking for. And, affinity bias has taken over because we all tend to connect with people like us. So helping to look at the recruitment process, not only, where you're recruiting, what schools you're recruiting at, but are the people involved in recruitment? Do you have a diverse group of people conducting these interviews? Do you have women on the team? Do you have other people of color? And are they trained in how to do, a behavioral-based interviewing?
On the topic of recruiting and retention and advancement, what is your take on, say, the Mansfield Rule? Do you find that the Mansfield Rule or quotas work, and are they necessary in order to help achieve that level of parity at levels of leadership?
Yeah, I think the Mansfield Rule has been a brilliant initiative. It was started back in 2017. And for people who don't know about the Mansfield Rule, it was sort of a takeoff from the Rooney Rule, which was named after Dan Rooney, who was the owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, he recognized that there were very few coaches of color. So he implemented a rule and got the NFL to go along with it, that whenever they were recruiting a new coach, they had to have at least one person of color in the candidate pool. Well, the Mansfield Rule is sort of an extension of that, and it's named after Arabella Mansfield, who was the first woman who was admitted to the bar in the United States, and actually in 1869 in the state of Iowa. So what the Mansfield Rule did starting in 2017 was to require that firms have 30% women and people of color in their candidate pool for leadership roles, so practice group heads, managing partners, people on the executive committee, and also for promotion to partnership, the requirement that you had to have a pool of 30% women and people of color. Because the bigger the pool, the greater the likelihood, right, that you're going to end up selecting people from a larger pool, because generally what we hear is the pool is so small or we can't find them. So Mansfield was started in 2017, and at the time there were some 42 firms that joined, and now there are 117 firms that are Mansfield certified. And in addition to women and people of color, they've added in LGBTQ and also people with disabilities. So I think we're seeing a lot of traction and positive results from the Mansfield Rule. Firms have reported on the increase in the number of, partners that have been made, people of color and women who have been appointed to management positions and practice group heads. Again, part of it is about being intentional and deliberate. And if you have to have a pool of 30%, you're going to work hard to get that pool right. And there's a greater likelihood that you're going to actually end up selecting some people from that pool. So I applaud the Mansfield Rule. And I think that's a better way to go. I know you asked about quotas. I think quotas are a bit of a throwback. I think they trigger a lot of negative response from people. I support the notion of targets, and lots of corporations have targets in terms of, levels of representation that they want to achieve, both in terms of gender diversity and ethnic and racial diversity. So corporations have been, setting targets for a long time. And, to be honest, look, we set targets in other areas of our business, targets in terms of revenue. So if you are truly interested in increasing, demographic representation, why wouldn't you set some targets, which I think are different than quotas? But I think you have to be intentional and deliberate about making the decision that you want to increase your numbers, and here's how you're going to go about doing it, because just having good intentions is not enough. And in fact, that's what the the general counsel of Coca-Cola said, and his quote was very strong. He says, "We will no longer celebrate good intentions or highly unproductive efforts that haven't already likely produced better diverse staffing." So it's that notion that, you have to get serious about this and do it in a way that really is going to achieve results. And I think Mansfield Rule has been a very effective initiative.
How do firms keep D&I efforts alive for the firms that get it right and create lasting cultural change and aren't just checking the box? What are they doing to get it right?
Well, I think it's leadership from the top, and that's always the case. You have to have an executive committee, a managing partner, and hopefully a partnership that really cares about this and is focused on it. But there are any number of other ways, Kelly, that firms are having some success with this. I mentioned a few, in terms of doing a culture assessment, having a strategic plan, getting Mansfield certified. One of the other things we've seen, reap success is sponsorship programs. So we've now worked with 2 firms who have developed sponsorship programs. And sponsoring is very different than mentoring. Pretty much every firm we've ever worked in has a mentoring program, but success has been very uneven. Generally, it's you get taken to lunch once or twice, and most of the mentees tell us that they really don't get enough time on the calendar of their partner mentors. Sponsorship is a little different. It's where you pull very senior people in the firm, generally your big rainmakers, your practice group heads, your members of the executive committee. You assign them a sponsee, and this is someone who's very senior in their career. So either someone who is on track to partnership, and the idea of the sponsorship is to really get them over the hurdle, get them to partnership, or in firms where there is a non-equity and equity partnership. So often in one firm, it was non-equity partners who were put in the sponsorship program, and the idea was to help them get to equity partnership. So part of the role of the sponsor is, to help them develop a book of business. This firm had a book of business requirement to make it to equity partner, but part of it is just understanding what you need to do to be considered, for partnership or for equity partnership. So I've seen some positive results from sponsorship programs, and I think that is becoming a best practice because, at the end of the day, historically, we know that people who have succeeded in firms all had a really good sponsor, rabbi, mentor, whatever you want to call it, tutor. Most people don't do this on their own. There really has to be somebody who has a powerful voice, and it's usually because they have a book of business or they're in a leadership role in the firm who can help you to build those relationships, make the connections you need, network, build your book of business, and increase your visibility and profile in the firm.
With our last couple of minutes, do you have any examples of great success stories of the firms that you've worked with in terms of folks who have implemented these initiatives very well, that have seen success, that have done a good job either holding folks accountable or incentivizing folks to partake in the D&I efforts?
Yeah, some of the success stories, Kelly, I've kind of woven in a little bit, like these 2 firms who have created these sponsorship programs. It did result in a number of women and people of color making it to equity partnership. In another firm around utilization rates, this firm had success moving the needle because they tracked their utilization rates. They were sobered by the results. What happened was that the chief diversity officer took those utilization rates and then worked on a one-on-one basis with each practice group leader to say, okay, here are your utilization rates. We need to get them up. Let us help you. What tools and resources do you need from us? And just the result of doing a very intentional and deliberate deep dive on utilization rates, this firm was able to move the needle and close those gaps where they found women and people of color being inadvertently underutilized, and also to work on the type of work they were doing. And that did a lot to propel the careers of some of the people of color and in the firm who were sort of stagnating, if you will.
Angela, thank you so much for your time today. Arlen, we'll kick it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Kelly.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Kelly and Angela, for an exciting discussion and that went so much deeper than often what we hear on this topic. So thank you very much. I want to say thank you to everyone who is attending as well. And of course, we'll take this opportunity to mention a couple of upcoming forum events that we would love to have all of you participate in. First of all, the forum's first ever virtual construction conference will occur next week on February 24th through the 26th. The conference features a 2-track system and includes something for everyone. There's a fundamentals of construction law track, which will provide attendees with a solid understanding of the key elements of construction law. Now, this track is perfect for those who are relatively new to construction law, as well as those who occasionally encounter construction law issues in their broader practice, whether in-house or as private practitioners. And even non-lawyer construction professionals are candidates for this course. Now, on the general track, which is of appeal to perhaps more experienced construction lawyers, but as well as everyone else, includes a number of sessions of interest to those on topics such as federal investigations, handling racial bias on project sites, and we have a keynote speaker who is the renowned construction economist, Anirban Basu. Many of you have likely come across Anirban in various contexts. So attendees can sign up for one or both of the tracks, and it's really, really affordable for less than the cost of most of your billable hours. You can easily get this great training. And there will also be several opportunities to network with other attendees through receptions, trivia games, division activities, and other social experiences and activities. So you can sign up on the forum website at americanbar.org, search for construction law under the ABA Groups tab, and we would love to see you there. Finally, we want to let you know that our next Diversity and Inclusion Brunch session will be held on Thursday, March 18th, 2021 at 1 p.m. Eastern. And our guest speaker will be prominent African-American lawyer and lobbyist, Yolanda Jackson of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Our own Lisa Colon will engage Ms. Jackson in a discussion about her unique career path and her notable work related to historically Black colleges and universities. So mark your calendars for that and join us next month. Until then, stay safe and be well. Thank you.
Thank you.